before the smoke cleared from the dining room of Hargrove and Sons, before the screaming stopped and the crystal stopped shattering against the marble floor, one thing had already happened that could never be undone. A 23-year-old waitress named Laurel Voss had thrown herself in front of a 78-year-old woman she had known for exactly 11 minutes. And now she was bleeding out on the floor of the finest restaurant in Halifax, Nova Scotia, with 3 bullets in her side, and one lodged somewhere near her left shoulder blade, and the most dangerous man in Atlantic Canada was kneeling over her, pressing his bare hands against wounds that were not supposed to exist. If you want to know how a girl like Laurel ends up married to a man like Eamon Calloway, this is where the story starts. Not with candlelight or roses, with blood on white linen, with a woman who moved before she thought, with a Don who for the first time in 22 years did not know what to do with his hands. Laurel Voss had been working the Wednesday dinner shift at Hargrove and Sons for almost 2 years by the time it happened. She knew every table by feel, the wobble in table 7, the way the light above table 12 flickered exactly once every 40 minutes, the fact that the couple who always sat in the back corner booth ordered the same thing every week and never once looked at each other while they ate. She was not supposed to be there that night. Her co-worker Diane had called in sick, and Laurel had picked up the shift because she needed the money, and because saying no had never come naturally to her. That was the thing about Laurel. She was 23 years old. She had a biology degree she hadn't used, a lease she could barely afford in the north end of Halifax, and a habit of filling in gaps that other people left behind. Her mother always said that habit would either save her or bury her. Both turned out to be true. The woman at table 4 came in at exactly 7:45. Laurel noticed her right away, not because of how she was dressed, though the woman's coat alone probably cost more than Laurel's monthly rent, but because of the way she carried herself. Straight-backed, unhurried, the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from absolute certainty that the world will wait for you. She was 78, Laurel would learn later. Her name was Brigid Calloway. She had silver hair pinned back with a tortoise-shell comb, pearl earrings that had belonged to her own mother, and eyes the color of dark water. The kind that looked like they had seen things and decided, long ago, not to be surprised by anything else. She was alone, which was unusual. 2 men in dark coats had been stationed near the entrance, but Laurel could see them from across the room. One was scrolling his phone with the slack attention of someone who had decided nothing was going to happen that evening, and the other had stepped outside, presumably for a smoke. They were not watching the room. They were not watching Brigid. They were not watching anything. Laurel brought the older woman the breadbasket and the wine list without being asked. Brigid looked up with something that might have been surprise. "You remembered," Brigid said. Laurel blinked. "I'm sorry. I was here 3 weeks ago. Tuesday. You brought the bread before I could ask." A small, precise smile. "I notice when people pay attention. It's just part of the job," Laurel said, which was something she genuinely believed and which Brigid Calloway clearly did not. "Sit with me for a moment," the older woman said. Laurel glanced toward the kitchen. The hostess caught her eye and gave a microscopic shrug. She sat. They talked for 7 minutes. Brigid asked about the evening specials and then didn't order any of them. Asked where the fish came from, asked how long Laurel had worked there. She asked these questions the way some people ask questions, not to fill silence, but because she actually wanted the answers. Laurel found herself saying more than she meant to, that she'd grown up in Truro, that her father had been a cook, not a chef, he always made that distinction, that she had planned to go to medical school once, but the plan had quietly dissolved the way some plans do, without drama. Just erosion. Brigid listened, really listened. The kind of listening that makes you feel, briefly, like you are the only person in the room. "You're wasted here," Brigid said simply, and it didn't feel like an insult. Laurel had just stood to take the older woman's order when the front door opened. She felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air, the way a room changes when something wrong enters it. Later, she would not be able to explain exactly how she knew. She just knew, the way you know sometimes that a dog is going to bite before it moves, something in the angle of the man's shoulders, something in the speed. There were two of them. They moved through the restaurant with the specific terrible efficiency of people who had already decided what they were going to do. One of them had a gun out before he reached the second table. The screaming started. Chairs scraped back. Glass hit the floor. Laurel did not scream. She did not run. What she did, and she has never been fully able to account for this, was step directly in front of Brigid Calloway. She didn't think about it. She didn't weigh it. It was less a decision than a reflex, like pulling your hand back from a flame. She saw the older woman stand, and she saw where the gun was pointing, and her body simply moved. The first shot hit her in the side. The second and third came fast, within seconds. The fourth caught her in the shoulder as she was already going down. She heard Brigid's voice above her, sharp, urgent, cracked, with something that might have been the first real fear the woman had felt in years. And she heard the sound of the two guards finally coming through the door. And she heard more shouting, more running, and then the sound started to blur and separate, and she found herself looking up at the ceiling of Hargrove and Sons, which was plaster with crown molding and small recessed lights, and she thought, with strange clarity, that the lights above table 12 were not flickering anymore. Then she thought nothing at all. Eamon Calloway was 41 years old, and he had not run anywhere in a very long time. He ran that night. His phone had rung at 7:53. The call lasted 4 seconds, his mother's voice, strangely calm, saying his name once, and then the line went dead. He had been across the city, at a meeting in a private room above a restaurant in the South End, and he left so fast that two of his men had to jog to keep up with him in the parking garage. He arrived at Hargrove and Sons 12 minutes later. The police were not there yet. His people had gotten there first, as they always did. The restaurant had been cleared of other guests. That had taken less than 3 minutes, efficiently and without explanation. The two men who had entered were no longer a concern. The two guards from the door were kneeling in the corner of the room, neither of them hurt, both of them very much aware of how much trouble they were in. Eamon walked past all of it. His mother was seated at table 4, exactly where she had been. Someone had wrapped a coat around her shoulders. She was holding a cloth pressed to her hands. Though she hadn't been shot, the blood on her palms was not her own. She looked up when Eamon came in. She looked, briefly, like his mother, something soft and shaken underneath the composure, and then she was herself again, controlled and precise and watching him. "She's there," Brigid said. She didn't gesture. She didn't need to. Laurel was on the floor 10 feet away, on her back, surrounded by two of Eamon's men, who had already cut away part of her jacket and were applying pressure to the wounds with the specific, practiced calm of people who had done this before. She was breathing, barely. Eamon crossed the room and knelt down. He had seen injuries before. He had seen worse. He had made worse happen, if he was honest with himself, which he generally preferred not to be. But something about this particular image, this young woman, slight, dark-haired, in the white shirt and black vest of a waitress, bleeding on the floor of his mother's restaurant, undid something in him that he had spent 20 years making sure stayed fastened. "She pushed me out of the way," Brigid said from behind him. Her voice was even. "She didn't know who I was. She didn't know who you were. She saw a woman who was going to be shot, and she put herself in front of it." Eamon didn't answer. "She told me about her father," Brigid continued. "He was a cook in Truro. He made that distinction." Eamon looked at his mother. He had no idea what she was telling him. He would understand it later. "Don't let her die," Brigid said. "It was not a request. He didn't. The hospital they brought her to was private, not a place that appeared on any public directory, not a place with a sign out front or visiting hours or intake paperwork. It was used exclusively for situations like this one, situations where the people involved could not afford to answer questions in an emergency room and where the quality of care was, by absolute necessity, exceptional. The surgeon worked for 3 hours. Eamon sat in the hallway outside the room for all of it. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled up. He had blood on his hands from where he had pressed down on Laurel's wounds in the car on the way over, not because his men couldn't do it, but because he needed something to do, and he needed it to matter, and the only thing that mattered in that moment was keeping the pressure even. His phone buzzed every few minutes. He looked at it once and then turned it face down on the floor beside him. His second-in-command, a lean and careful man named Silas Brine, came and sat beside him at one point without being asked. He didn't say anything. He was good at knowing when not to. "The two men," Eamon said eventually. "Dealt with," Silas said. "The guards." A pause. "Waiting for you." "And who sent them?" Another pause, longer this time. "We have a name. It's complicated. It always is." Eamon picked up his phone and looked at the ceiling. "Tell me, tomorrow." Silas nodded and left. At 11:43, the surgeon came out. She was a small woman in her 50s named Dr. Adela Crane, who had worked for Eamon's family for 8 years, and who had, in that time, developed the specific manner of someone who delivers news to people who are used to getting what they want. Neutral. Precise. No flourish. "She's stable," Dr. Crane said. "The shoulder wound is the most complex. There was damage to the muscle. She'll need physiotherapy. The three in the side missed anything critical by luck or by grace, depending on your persuasion." A pause. "She's young. She's healthy. She was lucky." "She's not lucky," Eamon said. "She shouldn't have been there at all." Dr. Crane looked at him steadily. "No," she agreed. "She shouldn't have." He went in to see her at midnight. Laurel was unconscious, which the doctor had said would last through the night. She was connected to monitors, an IV in her left arm, her right shoulder bandaged heavily. She looked very young, which she was. She looked very small, which she wasn't, really. She was 5'6" and, as he would later learn, had strong opinions and a tendency to stand her ground in an argument, which was not at all apparent while she was sedated and lying in a hospital bed in the dark. Eamon sat in the chair beside the bed. He did not have a plan for what he was doing. He was not a man who usually operated without a plan. He sat there for 4 hours. Laurel woke to a ceiling she didn't recognize and a pain in her side that was thorough and specific, and unlike anything she had felt before. She lay still for a moment, cataloging sensations, the cool pull of an IV, the muffled quiet of a room that was too insulated to be a regular hospital, the faint smell of something clinical underneath, something that was inexplicably cedar. There was a man in the chair beside her bed. He was asleep, or close to it, his head tilted back, his arms crossed, his jacket folded over the arm of the chair with a precision that seemed at odds with sleeping in a hospital chair. Dark hair, strong jaw, the kind of face that even in repose suggested it was used to being listened to. She had never seen him before. She was certain of this. She would have remembered. She shifted, and he was awake immediately. Not groggy, not gradual, just suddenly alert, eyes open, watching her. "You're awake," he said. "Where am I?" she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. "Somewhere safe." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How much pain are you in?" "Enough." She looked at the ceiling. "Who are you?" The question settled between them. He seemed to consider it with more weight than it should have required. "My name is Eamon Calloway," he said. "The woman you protected last night is my mother." Laurel closed her eyes, opened them. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. Because of you." She absorbed this. "She seemed like a good person," she said finally, which was, even Eamon would later admit, an extraordinary thing to say under the circumstances. Not "I need a phone call" or "what happened to the men who shot me" or "how long have I been here?" Just, she seemed like a good person. "She is," he said, and his voice did something she couldn't quite name. "She wants to see you when you're able." "Okay." Laurel looked at him. "How bad is it?" "The shoulder. The surgeon says you'll have full use. There's muscle damage. It will take time." "How much time?" "Months. With physiotherapy." She nodded slowly. She was doing math in her head. Shifts missed, rent due, the biology tutoring job she picked up on weekends. He could see her doing it. He had become very good over many years at reading what people were thinking when they thought no one was watching. "Whatever you need," he said. "It's handled." She looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were gray-green and exceptionally direct, which he had not expected. "You don't have to do that. I know, I didn't do it because of who she was. I know that too." A silence. Somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped steadily. The cedar smell was coming from the chair. From him, she realized. Something in whatever he used, it was oddly grounding. "She told me about your father," Eamon said. "The cook." Laurel went still. "She told you that?" "On the phone. She called me the moment you were stabilized. He stopped. Started again. She doesn't call me when she's scared. She called me to tell me about your father, the distinction he made. Laurel didn't say anything. She was blinking too fast. I think, Eamon said carefully, that she was telling me who you are before she told me what you'd done. The heart monitor picked up its pace very slightly. Rest, he said. He stood. I'll be outside. You don't have to. I'll be outside, he repeated. Not harsh, just certain. He was there when she woke up again 6 hours later. She didn't ask why. Brigid Calloway came on the second day. She walked into the room with her coat on and her back straight and her pearl earrings in, and she looked at Laurel in the hospital bed with an expression that Laurel would, later, describe as the most complicated thing she had ever seen on a human face. Not pity, not gratitude exactly, something deeper than either. She sat in the chair Eamon had been sleeping in. You're going to let me do something for you, she said, without preamble. I'm going to insist, and you're going to eventually agree, so we might as well skip to the agreement. Laurel almost laughed. I don't know who you are, you know who I am now. Brigid's eyes were steady. You knew who I wasn't on Wednesday night. You knew I was an old woman, and that someone was going to hurt me and you moved. That's enough. It wasn't a calculation. I know. That's why I'm here. The older woman folded her hands in her lap. When you've healed, you'll come stay at the house for a while. Your recovery will be supervised properly. After that, if you want nothing more to do with us, you'll be free to go. You'll also have enough that the going will be considerably easier than it is now. Laurel studied her, and if I say no, Brigid considered this with apparent seriousness, then I'll be very disappointed. I don't get disappointed often. I find it inefficient. A beat. Also, my son will simply worry about you from a distance for the rest of your natural life and never say so to anyone, and I'll have to watch that happen, which will be exhausting. This time Laurel did laugh, short and surprised, and immediately painful from the wound in her side. She pressed her hand to her ribs and winced, and Brigid watched her with something that might have been fondness. The house, Laurel said. Eamon's house, mine, Brigid said, though the lines have blurred somewhat over the years. She tilted her head. Are you afraid of him? Laurel thought about it honestly. No, she said. I don't think I am. Brigid nodded as though this confirmed something. Good. He'd find that very difficult to work with. She stayed for 6 weeks. The house was on the water, 40 minutes outside of Halifax. A property that managed to feel private without feeling fortified, which she later understood was a very deliberate and expensive illusion. There were people on the grounds at all hours, but they were careful about it. Eamon was there most mornings and most evenings, and away for stretches of days in between, and during those stretches Brigid would appear for breakfast and stay for hours longer than she seemed to intend. Laurel's shoulder healed, slower than she wanted, faster than the doctor had predicted. She went through physiotherapy 3 times a week with a woman named Dr. Crane who was direct to the point of curtness and who seemed to view Laurel's determination to recover quickly as a personal challenge. She and Eamon circled each other for 2 of those 6 weeks. They were polite. They were careful. They had dinner with Brigid 3 times, and each time the older woman found a reason to leave the table and somehow never came back, and Laurel and Eamon would sit across from each other in the candlelight of the formal dining room and talk about things that were not what they were actually talking about. He told her, in fragments, on different evenings, what he did and what his family was. He was not apologetic about it. He was not performatively dark about it either. He stated it the way you state a fact you've had a long time to make peace with, calmly watching her face for what it would do. Her face did not do what he expected. I grew up in Truro, she said, at some point during one of these conversations. I know what the world is. I know it isn't clean. Most people know that in theory, he said. I'm not most people, she said, not boasting, just correcting. He looked at her across the table, and something in him rearranged itself, quietly and without announcement, the way furniture sometimes shifts in a house that is settled. In the 4th week, she found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m. He was standing at the counter, drinking coffee and reading something on his phone. He looked up when she came in. He didn't seem surprised. She sat on the counter across from him. There were actual chairs. She just didn't take them. And she said, "Who ordered the hit on your mother?" He was quiet for a moment. A man named Patrick Geary, a competitor. He thought he could use her as leverage. Past tense. Yes. She nodded. Was it messy? Does it matter to you? She thought about it. A little. Not the way it would matter to most people, I think. I'm not going to pretend I want him sitting in prison writing letters. Eamon set his phone down. He looked at her carefully in the particular way he had, thorough, unhurried, like he was reading something written in small print. You're unusual, he said. So I've been told. It's not a criticism. I know, she said. I took it as a compliment. There was a silence between them that had a different quality than the earlier ones, less careful, less managed. The kitchen was dark for the light above the stove, and the windows showed the black of the water beyond the property, and Laurel was sitting on the counter in the borrowed house of the most dangerous family in Atlantic Canada, and she felt, improbably, entirely herself. Laurel, he said. Yeah. He didn't say anything else. He picked up his coffee and drank it, and looked at her over the rim of the mug, and she looked back, and neither of them looked away for a long time. She did not leave after 6 weeks. She did not leave because Brigid needed someone to go over the bids for the restoration of the East Wing. The house was 300 years old in places and a ceaseless project, and Laurel, who had nothing better to do and a genuine interest in structural problem-solving, had offered to look at the documents. That led to several days of involvement. Those days became 2 more weeks, and somewhere in those 2 weeks, she stopped counting. The thing happened between them slowly and then entirely. There was no dramatic declaration. There was an evening in the library when he put his hand over hers, on the arm of the chair, just once, and then removed it and said nothing, and she looked at the side of his face and understood that this was a man who did not ask for things he was not certain he should have. She covered his hand with hers. He turned and looked at her. For a man accustomed to controlling every variable in every room, he looked, for just a moment, genuinely uncertain. I know who you are, she said. I've known for a while. I'm not confused about it. I know you're not, he said. Then stop treating it like I might change my mind. He was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite not. You're very direct. It's a character trait. I've noticed. He did not put distance between them again after that. The question of the contract came out 2 months later. It turned out that Patrick Geary, the man who had sent the gunman to Hargrove and Sons, had not been acting on his own initiative, not entirely. The hit on Brigid had been commissioned, partially, by someone within Eamon's own organization. Someone who had calculated that grief would destabilize the operation, that a son undone by his mother's death would be easier to displace. The calculation had been wrong in every direction. Eamon handled it. Laurel did not ask for details, and he did not offer them, but she could read the weight of it in his shoulders for the 3 days before it was resolved, and she could read when the weight lifted. She was learning his silences the way she had learned the tables at Hargrove and Sons, by paying attention to them until they told her what she needed to know. Silas Brine told her, the day after, with the careful tone of a man who was still deciding whether she was someone to be trusted or managed. He hasn't been shaken like this in 20 years. Not since his father. He wasn't shaken, Laurel said. He was angry. Silas looked at her with something new in his eyes. There's a difference? With him, yes. She refilled her coffee. The anger meant he knew what to do. The shake comes when he doesn't. A pause. You figured that out fast, Silas said. I pay attention, Laurel said, which was exactly what Brigid had said about her, the first night before everything changed. Brigid told her, on a Thursday morning in November, over tea in the east sitting room with the windows looking out at the gray Atlantic, that she was glad. Laurel asked her what she was glad about. That you picked up that shift, Brigid said simply. That Diane called in sick. Laurel was quiet for a moment. Outside, the water was running dark and cold, and the light was the flat white light of a Nova Scotia November. I almost didn't, she said. I was tired. I almost said no. Brigid looked at her steadily. But you didn't. Know that, Brigid said, is who you are. She lifted her cup. And it is, I should tell you, exactly who this family needs. Laurel looked at her. There was something in the older woman's face, the particular warmth that comes from someone who has decided you belong, that she had not felt directed at herself in a long time, since her father, since Truro. She found she didn't have an answer for it, she just held it. Eamon asked her, in December, on an evening when they were alone in the library, and the fire was low, and neither of them had said anything for 40 minutes, because they had reached the point of comfortable silences, whether she had thought about what she wanted her life to look like. She thought he meant it practically, the job, the apartment she had quietly given up, the future. She said, "I want it to look like this." He turned to look at her. "Not exactly this," she said. "I'm going to need something to do. I'll lose my mind being decorative." She glanced at him. "But this, with you, with Bridget, in this house, in this city, with all of what it is and all of what you are." She paused. "I'm not afraid of the weight of it." He was quiet for a long time. The fire cracked. "I know," he said finally. "I've known for a while." "Then stop treating it like you might change your mind," he said, and his voice had something in it that it usually kept covered. "I know, you told me." She looked at him. So I'd like it to be official," he said. "I'd like you to be mine in a way that the people in my world understand and respect and do not mistake." He met her eyes. "I'd like to marry you, Laurel, not for show, not for protection, because I can't imagine the library without you in it, and I don't want to." The fire cracked again. "Okay," she said. He blinked. "Okay?" "Yes, Amon. Okay." She looked back at her book. "I've been waiting 3 weeks." He stared at her. Then, slowly, that corner of his mouth moved again, and this time it was fully a smile, and it transformed his face in a way that very few people in his world had ever seen, and that Laurel was quietly proud to be one of. "You could have asked me," he said. "I know," she said, "but I thought you needed to get there yourself." The wedding was small. The right people were there. The people who mattered in the world that Amon Calloway occupied. The people who needed to see and understand what had changed. Bridget stood beside her son. Silas Brine stood up straight for the first time Laurel had ever witnessed. Laurel wore her hair down and carried flowers from the garden she had been redesigning since October and held her shoulders even. Both of them, despite the scar on the left one, that Dr. Crane had told her would fade but probably not disappear. She didn't want it to disappear. It was part of how the story started, and the story, with everything it cost and everything it gave her, was the best one she had ever been inside of. After the ceremony, Bridget held both of her hands and looked at her the way she had looked at her on that first evening in Hargrove and Sons, like she was someone worth noticing before she knew the reason. "I knew," Bridget said quietly, "before you even fell." Laurel looked at her. "Knew what?" The older woman's eyes were warm and unwavering. "That you were going to be family." Laurel held that. Outside, the Atlantic was running silver in the December light, cold and ancient and indifferent to the small human moments that happened beside it. Inside, Amon found her elbow with his hand, unhurried, certain, the way he did everything, and the warmth of it moved through her like something she hadn't known she was waiting for. What would you do? If you were standing in that restaurant, watching someone fall, would you move or would you freeze? Tell us in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe to Sadie's Romance Library. There's a new story coming this week, and you won't want to miss it.